Pieced together from bits of nightmares, Mary Shelley's creation began the horror of the Victorian age.
It's alive! It's alive!
The Frankenstein monster still haunts us today. Next on Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror.
And now, once again, I bid my hideous progeny go forth and prosper. I have an affection for it was the offspring of happy days, when death and grief were but words, which found no true echo in my heart.
The 19th century, and especially the Victorian age, saw the birth of the great horror stories which still play a huge part in global culture. More huge than ever, in fact. They've even become absorbed into the language. A Frankenstein monster, a Jekyll and Hyde personality, a vampiric relationship, and so on, which is a sure sign that they've become an accepted part of everyday life. These stories represent the greatest contribution by British authors of the 19th century to the mass culture of this century, and I mean mass. Books, plays, films, videos, comics, advertisements, everything from novels to breakfast cereal packets. Where did they originate from? Why have they stayed so very, very famous? Why is their combination of desire and loathing, strangely mixed, so popular? And what's happened to them as they've been transformed over the last century or century and a half into something else?
The long-term origins of these stories go back to classical Greece and Rome, if not earlier. But the origins of modern horror begin right here in the unlikely and affluent setting of the shores of Lake Geneva. It was here that in June 1816, the 18-year-old Mary Godwin, later to become Mary Shelley, was enjoying a summer tour of the alpine scenery, walking through the vineyards and forests of the lakeside, and staying in this villa overlooking Lake Geneva. Frankenstein, the first modern horror story, was born in the upper bedroom when Mary Godwin had a horrifying dream. It was here, on the 15th or 16th of June, 1816, that Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin had her terrifying nightmare. A half-waking, half-sleeping dream, as she put it, in which her daytime thoughts about science and birthing became a nighttime story which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature. She tried hard to blot it out by concentrating on the wooden shutters and the wash basin, and also by focusing on the Alps outside and the sky. But she just couldn't get it out of her mind. The science came from conversations she'd had about the spark of life and where it came from just before going to bed. But the birthing came from her own sad experience. For Mary's mother had died just 15 days after giving birth to her, and in 1815, Mary had lost her own little girl, born prematurely. The elements of Mary Godwin's bad dream had started in her impressionable young mind some years before. In 1814, Mary, who was then 16, had eloped with her boyfriend, the 21-year-old poet Percy Shelley, who was married at the time. Their journey was, as she put it, an act of love, youth, and fearlessness. And they made their way through the heartland of romantic Europe, the River Rhine, a favourite subject of fashionable painters and poets of the day. Mary had just discovered she was pregnant, and they only had £25 and a box full of books between them. The experience stayed with her, as she noted in her private journal.
The Rhine is violently rapid, and though interrupted by no rocks, is swollen by high waves. Each tower-crowned hill, each picturesque ruin, each shadowy ravine and beetling precipice was passed and gazed upon with eager curiosity and delight. The very names of the titles of volumes of romance. Beyond, the sunset was illuminating the mountains and the clouds and casting the reflection of its hues on the agitated river. All the spirits of old Germany haunt the place.
When they reached the town of Gernsheim, Mary and Percy left the boat behind for a few hours and went for a long walk towards the foothills of Magnetberg Mountain. Here they could see the ruined walls and fortifications of yet another castle on top of a wooded hill. This castle had a legend of an alchemist called Johann Conrad Dippel, born here in 1673, who'd sought an elixir of life by distilling the essence of animal blood and human bones and selling it under the name Dippel's Oil. Dippel's research laboratory was said to be here, in this tower. The castle was called the Rock of the Franks, or Frankenstein. Mary Godwin and Percy Shelley also visited Neuchâtel, the home of these robots, or automata, made by local clockmakers in the 1780s and still going strong. They were toured across Europe in a blaze of publicity, and whenever they gave a performance, they raised some of the big questions of the day. Could the behavior of people be simulated by artificial means? What did make humans tick? One mechanical boy left a mind-boggling message to posterity in neat 18th century handwriting. I think, therefore I am.
One of the phenomena which peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame. Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries?
Mary Godwin was raised by her father, the radical philosopher William Godwin, who would continue to have a profound influence on her ideas for the rest of her life. He taught her to be both fascinated and terrified by the latest technology. Fascinated because it was new and potentially liberating, terrified because it was likely to get into the wrong hands and become an uncontrollable metal monster. Mary's late mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, had written of nature as something to be treated with kindness and respect, rather than something for men to exploit and destroy. So Mary Godwin, a vegetarian, grew up thinking hard about the dark, satanic mills of the first industrial revolution. In the years just before the writing of Frankenstein, 1814 to 16, the key debate of the moment, which had been the subject of public lectures at the Royal College of Surgeons here in London, was about the origins of the principle of life itself. Now, on the one hand, there was the traditional view that life originated with a vital spark analogous to electricity, a vital spark which kick-started the soul and which ultimately came from God. Rather like Michelangelo's creation of Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. That sort of thing. That was the traditional view. The new view was that life was a mere assemblage of functions of the body, bits and pieces of material that needed a new label to describe them, the word biology. This was an early version of the theory of evolution. No vital spark, no kick-starting of the soul, just parents. Mary Godwin was taken to sensational public demonstrations of the new power of electricity, or galvanism. The Italian scientist Luigi Galvani had sparked these off in 1791 when he started experimenting with dead frogs by prodding metal rods linked up to a galvanic battery into the muscles of the animal. As the frog's legs twitched, Galvani concluded that the electric current was in the animal rather than the rods. Galvani's nephew went even further in his experiments by applying an electric current to the corpse of a murderer who'd been hanged at Newgate just 1 hour before. Demonstrations of this kind seem to have affected Mary deeply. She'd gone to one of them when heavily pregnant, and after the tiny premature baby died, she'd written in her journal that she dreamt her dead child had only been cold, and that it was rubbed and prodded back to life again. In summer 1816, Mary Godwin's nightmare brought all these influences together into one unforgettable story.
Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror, will return in a moment. We now return to Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror.
The weather had turned nasty, and Mary and Percy were cooped up inside this elegant 18th century villa. They'd come to visit the superstar poet, George Gordon, Lord Byron, who was renting the house, but tensions between them soon began to show. Mary's excitable stepsister, Claire, had come halfway across Europe to announce to Byron that she was pregnant by him. Furious, Byron, mad, bad and dangerous to know, responded with the question, "Is the brat mine?" Dr. John Polidori, Byron's companion and physician, was a humourless man who fancied himself as a bit of a poet, but was seriously outclassed in the company and eminently teasable. Mary, meanwhile, suspected that Percy might be having an affair with Claire, while Byron rather hoped he was. When these highly strung people started passing the time by telling each other ghost stories as a kind of family bet, the result was one of the most bizarre evenings in the history of world literature. The story of the writing of Frankenstein is almost as famous as the book itself and has become a myth in its own right.
How beautifully dramatic! The crudest, savage exhibition of nature at her worst without, and we three, we elegant three within. I should like to think that an irate Jehovah was pointing those arrows of lightning directly at my head, the unbowed head of George Gordon, Lord Byron, England's greatest sinner. But I cannot flatter myself to that extent. Possibly those thunders of our dear Shelley, heaven's applause for England's greatest poet.
What of my Mary?
She is an angel.
You think so?
And yet you have written a tale that sent my blood into icy creeps. Look at her, Shelley. Can you believe that bland and lovely brow conceived of Frankenstein? A monster created from cadavers out of rifled graves?
Such an audience needs something stronger than a pretty little love story. So why shouldn't I write of monsters?
The real story of the telling of Frankenstein took place not in a vast baronial hall, but here in Byron's holiday villa, the Villa Diodati, in the living room on the first floor.
It all began with this book, a collection of ghost stories called Phantasmagoriana, translated from the original German into French and published some 4 years before. Lord Byron managed to get hold of a copy and, taking his cue from the second story in the collection, suggested in a playful spirit that they should each have a hand at trying a tale of terror for themselves. What happened next was recalled by Mary Godwin, by then Mary Shelley, in print some 15 years later. They were all cooped up in the villa because of incessant rain, she says, and 4 of them took part in the ghost story session. But the illustrious poets soon got bored with the game and gave up. She, meanwhile, was frantically busying herself to think of a story. Each morning I was asked, "Have you thought of a story?" And each morning I was forced to reply with a mortifying negative. Eventually, she came up with the creation sequence of Frankenstein, which shocked and surprised everyone, as well it might. Well, it was quite a cliffhanger and a pretty good story in itself. Trouble is, in fact, it didn't happen like that at all. The diary of Dr. John William Polidori, written at the exact time of the incidents described, and not 15 years later, tells a very different story. There were 5 people present, not 4, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, Dr. Polidori, Claire Claremont, Mary's stepsister, and of course, Mary herself. The ghost story session was a lot less playful and well-mannered than in Mary's account. It was some kind of a bizarre encounter group with all of them getting on each other's nerves, frustrated at not being able to get out on the lake sailing, and Shelley feeling particularly highly strung. Meanwhile, Polidori rushed around ministering to them, ether for Shelley and black drop or opium for Byron. Above all, Polidori's diary shows that Mary was the first to tell her story, not the last. Trouble with Mary's account is that it suggests that Frankenstein was just another ghost story born in a thunderstorm, when in fact it was and is much, much more than that. Well, whatever the truth of the matter, it does seem clear that when Mary told her story that night, she began with the now famous words, "It was on a dreary night of November
that I beheld my man completed." with an anxiety that almost amounted to agony. I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the window panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful, beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set.
As Mary reached the climax of her story of the birth of the beautiful creature, Polydori's diary says that Percy Shelley, who was evidently high on something, started hallucinating and thought he was going mad. He could scarcely believe his young girlfriend had come up with such a horrifying story.
Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror, will return in a moment. We now return to Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror.
Across the other side of the lake from the Villa Diodati, British tourists began to gather at the Hôtel d'Angleterre and peer through rented telescopes in the hope of catching a glimpse of the notorious poet. Wild rumors began to circulate of free love, group sex, and even a league of incest involving Percy, Mary, George, Claire, and anyone else who cared to join in. When tablecloths were seen drying on the villa's balcony, the tourists were convinced they were the girls' knickers. For Mary Godwin and Percy Shelley, enough was enough. They decided to escape from the villa into the Alps. When they arrived at the alpine village of Chamonix and excitedly checked in at the Hôtel de Londres, Percy tried to persuade Mary to expand her tale of the birth of the beautiful creature. She was reluctant at first, lacking in confidence. But here, she began the lengthy process of writing a full-length novel, weaving into it her deepest thoughts and anxieties about science and society. Mary started not with the beginning of the book, but with the central section, the creature's wanderings around the Genevan countryside following rejection by his parent.
You're fired.
He may consist of other people's spare parts, but he still has the full range of human feelings and emotions.
Who are you? I can't harm you.
Then she described the creature's rejection by everyone else he meets and his lashing out at an unfriendly world. He resolves to destroy his creator's entire family if he can't have one of his own. In the process of writing, Mary came to identify herself more and more with the creature. Encouraged by Percy, she crammed her first book with her own and other people's ideas about politics, parents, and children. Mary Godwin and Percy Shelley used to take their travelling library with them wherever they went, even on holiday. According to Mary's journal, she'd read one book a day, and sometimes even two, either before or after Percy had read them, so they could excitedly discuss their latest discoveries together of an evening in bed. Now, Frankenstein's been called an example of bibliogenesis, or birth by books, a living piece of literature stitched together from bits of other books as filtered through Mary Godwin's imagination. And for the long central section of the novel, where the creature describes his traumatic birth and upbringing as an outcast, Mary made full use of many of the books she'd read since leaving England. First of all, two key books by her parents. An Inquiry Concerning Political Justice by William Godwin, which told of the dangers of living alone too much and the importance of companionship, and The Vindication of the Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft, the only point of contact Mary had with her mother, which stressed the value of a careful, humane upbringing. Now, Émile, or On Education, by the Genevan philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which had been read by all the poets that summer, would have told her all about how if society treats you as ugly, you become ugly. Not so much ugly to look at as ugly behind the eyes. And Milton's Paradise Lost, which the creature stumbles on in the story and can't stop talking about thereafter. He identifies with Adam, the first man, and then, when things get worse and worse, with Satan, the fallen angel. Finally, all these big issues, political, social, moral, poetic, all come into focus in the great meeting of the creature and the creator, and Mary needed a suitably desolate end-of-the-world location to set it in. She found it when, with Percy, she set out from here, the Hôtel de Londres at Chamonix, for the Mer de Glace, the sea of ice in the shadow of Mont Blanc.
Nothing can be more desolate than the ascent of this mountain. The trees in many places have been torn away by avalanches, and some, half leaning over, present the appearance of vast and dreadful desolation. I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance, advancing towards me. He bounded over the crevices in the ice, among which I had walked with caution. His stature also, as he approached, seemed to exceed that of man. I was troubled. A mist came over my eyes, and I felt a faintness seize me. I perceived, as the shape came nearer, that it was the wretch I had created. Devil, do not poison the air with sounds of malice. Leave me. I go, cried he. But remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night.
Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror, will return in a moment. We now return to Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror.
Two months later, Mary Godwin and Percy Shelley moved back to England and the village of Great Marlow on the Thames. At the end of December 1816, they were married in a rather downbeat ceremony because it was still against both their principles to do so. When Mary mentioned the wedding in her journal, she even got the date wrong. So, this cottage at Great Marlow was their first real home together. It was here that Mary Shelley put the finishing touches to Frankenstein, and from here that Percy Shelley began to look for a publisher. It was, in fact, turned down by 3 publishing houses before it came out in spring 1818 in an edition of just 500 copies. Mary Shelley made the princely sum of £24 14 shillings on the deal, which can't have done much for the family finances. The first edition of Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, was published in 3 volumes, anonymously, with just a quotation from Adam in Milton's Paradise Lost on the title page. "Did I request thee, maker from my clay, to mould me man?" It was respectfully dedicated to Mary's father, William Godwin, author of Political Justice, etc. And perhaps for this reason, the earliest reviews in the conservative press tended to be cautious, to say the least. One of them said it was covertly promoting the passions and projects of the time and had to be treated with kid gloves. Another thought it was by Percy Shelley and full of poetic imagination. When it discovered the truth, it added, "For a man, it was excellent. For a woman, it was marvellous." The third panned the book, saying it was a tissue of disgusting absurdities, full of prose to make the flesh creep, which of course ensured its success, and led to the publication of another popular single-volume cut-down edition. It was Mary who did the cutting down, and this time the author's name, Mary W. Shelley, was proudly displayed on the title page. In this, the first ever Frankenstein illustration, presumably authorized by Mary herself, a terrified young research student in a cloak flees from a confused but still beautiful Adam-like creature. Frankenstein was given more of a conscience this time. There was less of the radicalism, and the emphasis shifted from Godwin's ideas about justice to making the flesh creep. Frankenstein had started on its journey from novel to popular myth. By the summer of 1823, the first stage version opened in London.
Oh, dear! Oh.
Frankenstein gains an exploding laboratory and a comic assistant called Fritz.
Oh, you're frightened out of your wits! Oh, what's that? What's that? Oh, it's only thunder! But if you ask my shrewd guess, it's my opinion that my master, like Dr. Faustus, is raising the devil! Oh! I say, I've got 2 loose teeth, and every time I go anywhere near that infernal laboratory, well, me head, it shakes like a dice box! Oh dear!
A German tourist wrote that the performances were over the top and the play was terrible, but the special effects were impressive.
If me legs don't lap under me, I'll make my escape! Oh!
Outside, on the streets, there was a demonstration calling on those who believed in traditional family values to boycott the play. But it was a fantastic success, and by that same autumn, 2 rival dramatisations were running in London, as well as 3 burlesque versions.
But with the mind of an infant.
Mary Shelley's complex and thoughtful fantasy about science and tolerance became a simple-minded parable about the dangers of playing God and a horror story about a grunting, incoherent monster.
Who approaches? Is that you, Behold, the horrid corpse to which I have given life.
Mary herself saw an early performance, and to her surprise, rather enjoyed it. "I was much amused, and it appeared to excite a breathless eagerness in the audience," she wrote. Presumption, or the fate of Frankenstein, ran in the West End for years and made Mary infamous. A few years later, when the expression "a Frankenstein monster" had already been used in Parliament, the early steam locomotive, the Rocket, ran over and killed the politician who was opening the Liverpool-Manchester railway line. A parody of Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus was rushed onto the London stage to cash in on the tragedy. FRANKENSTEIN, or the modern promise to pay. The creature really had become an out-of-control industrial monster. But it was the invention of cinema which completed the process of transforming the novel into a modern, popular myth. The first movie version was the Edison Company's Frankenstein of 1910, an adaptation of the stage version which Mary Shelley had seen 85 years before. This very rare piece of film was thought until as recently as the 1970s to have been lost. Mary hadn't described the creation scene in any technical detail, so Edison had to fill the gap with a bubbling cauldron, some magic spells, and a spot of alchemy. Later, the manic monster terrifies his maker, as he is threatened, on his wedding night.
When this dead hand moves, the monster created by a man they called mad is turned loose to strike terror into the hearts of men.
When Hollywood was preparing the first Frankenstein with sound in 1931, Universal Studios decided to make the creature, or rather the monster as he now was, a lumbering patchwork human being made up of scars and stitches.
Story you've heard about, talked about, the spine-tingling, blood-chilling story that stuns your emotions. Frankenstein.
Originally, the studio had considered a whole range of design options, including the idea of a robot, a piece of mechanical rather than biological engineering. In the end, though, the designers seem to have opted for an image of the madhouse from a series of prints called Caprices of 1799 by the Spanish painter Goya. The huge dome-like forehead made him resemble, as did Goya's print, someone with a very serious pituitary problem, a picture of disability and monstrousness rather than of beauty.
I've started on brain surgery for. Watch this. Get up. Come on, get up. That's right. Now come here. Come here. Sit. Sit down. Sit down.
Is this your creature of superior intellect? Your perfect physical being? Ask it a question of advanced physics.
The story of Frankenstein has, over the last century and a half, and especially since the invention of films and television, turned into a kind of parallel version, with successive audiences filling in the gaps, ironing out problems in the plot, and selecting the bits that seem to work best in changing times. Always a creation scene with lots of bangs and flashes, always a grunting monster on the rampage, and always a spectacular, explosive finale. Now, in the process, the emphasis has shifted away from Mary Shelley's complex philosophical novel towards a mad scientist and a monster. And since 1931, the monster has always looked a little like Boris Karloff. He's a thing of scars and stitches and skewers with a bolt through his neck to plug him into. But he's become more and more user-friendly, like everyone's baby brother in an overdeveloped body, with a little bit of tender loving care, he can belong to anyone's family. And if a 10-year-old can eat it, use it, or watch it, the name of Frankenstein's monster is on it. A contemporary fairy tale for today's little monsters. As a poem for children recently put it, when I'm feeling lonely, for Igor I will send. We'll go to my laboratory and we will make a friend. Sweet. But there's something for me a little bit apprehensive in this attempt to tame the creature, as if what he represents in the folk memory, the dangers of modern science, the threat to the environment, needs to be made a little bit less scary. So, Mary Shelley's nightmare becomes a rubber mask.
Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror, will return in a moment. We now return to Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror.
At the end of the book, Frankenstein relentlessly pursues the creature across Europe and the Black Sea to the icy wasteland of the Arctic, as far away from civilized society as it was possible for Mary Shelley to imagine. The creature has broken all the scientist's family ties by murdering his brother and his best friend and strangling his wife Elizabeth on their wedding night. But Victor Frankenstein dies of exhaustion, and the creature pays his last respects to his parent before disappearing into the whiteness. Only at this final moment can he find the words to articulate his deepest feelings of rejection and despair.
No sympathy may I ever find. When I first sought it, it was the love of virtue, the feelings of happiness and affection with which my whole being overflowed. But now that virtue has become to me a shadow, and that happiness and affection are turned into bitter and loathing despair. Once I falsely hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of unfolding. But now crime has degraded me beneath the meanest animal. The fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. I shall die. I shall no longer feel the agonies which now consume me. I shall no longer see the sun or stars, or feel the winds play on my cheeks. Light, feeling, and sense will pass away, and in this condition must I find my happiness.
Within 8 years of the Geneva summer of 1816, the summer that saw the creation of Frankenstein, all the men who'd taken part in that ghost story session at the Villa Diodati were dead. Dr. Polidori had poisoned himself. Percy Shelley had drowned when his yacht, the Ariel, capsized in a storm off the coast of Italy. And Lord Byron had died, a popular hero, in the cause of the liberation of Greece. So, by the age of 27, Mary Shelley felt, as she put it, as an old woman must feel. I may love none but the dead. Of her 5 children, only one had survived infancy. She spent the rest of her life struggling to earn a living as a writer, petitioning Shelley's father for an allowance, falling out one by one with Shelley's friends, and developing close companionships with a few select women friends, and withdrawing slowly into herself and her books. She tried hard to be likable, but somehow couldn't quite make it. A cold heart, she wrote in her journal. Have I a cold heart? God knows. But at least the tears are hot. Mary Shelley died in London at the age of 53 after a series of strokes on the 1st of February, 1851, the year of the Great Exhibition, a huge celebration of the wonders of science and technology. And she died having lived for over a quarter of a century in retrospect. Mary Shelley was buried here in St. Peter's Churchyard, Bournemouth, near the home of her surviving son. Her father, William Godwin, and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, were exhumed from St. Pancras Churchyard, London, and reburied here, side by side with their daughter. Much later, they were joined by the heart of Percy Shelley, the rest of him having been cremated in Italy. A slice of his heart was buried in a little silver urn in this grave. Towards the end of her life, she revisited the Villa Diodati and looked up at it from the shores of Lake Geneva. Was I still the same person who'd lived here, she asked herself, the companion of the dead? For all were gone. Even my young child died in infancy. Storm and blight and death had destroyed all while I was still very young. But one thing survived all the storm and the blight, to take on a life of its own, which its creator would scarcely have recognized. The thing she called my hideous progeny, born in a dream. The story of Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus.
I am Count Dracula.
Even today, the name strikes terror in the hearts of millions. Bram Stoker, the creator of The Count from Transylvania. Next time on Nightmare, the birth of Victorian horror. Tomorrow night, JFK comes back again to steal the nation's heart on an all-new special presentation of biography at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific. Now, witness the nightmarish events surrounding the creation of Dracula, next on A&E.